Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Tambry Harris, founder of Going Forward, Survivors to Thrivers. Tambry's a leadership life coach, spiritual guide, author, and speaker who encourages others to manifest their best selves and lives. Her 20 years of coaching and 9 years of spiritual direction translate into her work with survivors of sexual abuse and domestic violence through the Going Forward Survivors to Thrivers organization. Tambry has a master's degree in applied psychology and certifications in the areas of leadership coaching, spiritual direction, change management, and diversity. She guides survivors to examine limiting beliefs, find strength in their unique gifts and abilities, and claim a wholehearted, meaningful life. Tambry's first book, Awakening the Light, A Survivors to Thrivers Going Forward Story, was named a 2020 American Book Fest Best Book finalist. In this workbook, her story of wounding, struggle, and healing encourages survivors to understand their limiting beliefs, examine unhealthy patterns, and claim their going forward stories. She created the Group Growth Guide to support small groups in wishing to do this work together. Tambry has participated in 4 collaborative books: The Favor of Forgiveness in 2021, Our Own How to Heal Your Divides, An Abundance of Opportunities in 2022, Love Does Not Control in 2023, and the new book, Stop the Silence, Thriving After Childhood Sexual Abuse, which just came out. Tambry's also been a co-creator at the Wild Goose Festival. You can learn more about all of her work at survivorstothrivers.com. So Tambry, thanks so much for joining us again, and congratulations on all your work.
Thank you, Brian. It's exciting to be here to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, I think we first met at Wild Goose, didn't we? And, I learned about your work, and I thought, oh, my goodness, that's such a good match for How to Heal Our Divides that, I was really glad that you were able to contribute to it. And, your work and your book, just continue to thrive, which is always really great to see.
Thank you.
So maybe to get started, what else would you like people to know about you?
I really, when you said, things are continuing to thrive, I think, part of my message is that, most of us have experienced some kind of trauma, abuse, wounding in our life. And sometimes we can get stuck in a place of just kind of going through the motions and halfway living. And so my message through my organization and through the books that I write is really that there's so much more awaiting you. And so it's really about looking at, what is intended for your life and what might be getting in the way of being able to move into that. And I often frame it as, we have many chapters in our life, but we can claim our going forward story. And so really trying to work with people to think about what might their going forward story be, as well as just really trying to bring encouragement.
Mm-hmm. So before we start talking about books, I'd like to talk about how you went from corporate America to start your own business.
Yes.
I'm in the early stages of launching a new business called Finding Your Next Calling. And so I'm interested in hearing from people like you that have made a transition like yours. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about, kind of what motivated that and what it was like in the early stages, when you're off on your own for the first time and trying to figure things out? How did that work out for you?
Yes. So I was in corporate America for probably about 18 years. I worked in the power industry. I worked in for a Big 5 consulting firm. I worked for a financial institution. That was probably where I spent most of my time. And as you mentioned, my background in the leadership development, I was really doing a lot of organizational team and leader development in all 3 of those spaces, all 3 of those industries. And it really honed my skills and my confidence. And it was, a great opportunity. And it was 2006. And if anybody's familiar with what all happened in 2006 working in a financial institution, that's when everything crashed. And it was really a matter of Wow. They really, when people with everything was closing down and it was like, you know what, maybe this is the time because people had asked me in the past, when are you going to go out on your own?
Mm-hmm.
When are you going to go out on your own? And I thought, I think this is the time. And so there was a little bit of impetus for that. I raised my hand and got a displacement package. So that helped as well. But anyway, so that kind of got me launching. And I did have a good network of people to continue to tap into. And I think that's important to think about
Absolutely.
when when you're starting to branch out is, who are my allies and what is my network and what can I do? And so there's all kinds of different, promotional pieces like that. And then there's the piece of, okay, I've kind of got a blank slate. What is it that I want to really focus on? And because of the fact that a lot of the organizational level things were they last for a long time and just really can be very, very consuming. I was wanting to scale back some. I actually wanted a little more, some people use the word margin. I wanted a little more margin in my life where I wasn't so just pulled into work and so I could be more available too. I had a daughter who was in second grade at the time. And so it allowed me to claim
Mm.
my lifestyle that I wanted as well. So one, claiming what is it that you want to bring to the world? What is it you want to focus in? And also what kind of boundaries do you want to begin to create for yourself? And that can be really hard, as you know, Brian, when you're starting something, because there's so many possible to-dos. So really being intentional around that. So all that said, I ended up kind of narrowing and doing more team development and leader development, executive coaching kinds of things.
Okay.
So that was
A little bit more of a natural extension from your corporate job as
Exactly.
compared to what you're doing today.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. And so, so I had a reputation for this at the time. And so, so like LinkedIn, I could ask people for referrals and, accolades and that kind of thing to build that up and to get other people to know me. It was probably 7 years ago now that I'm doing that and I'm living that life. And the hashtag Me Too started, really taking off. And that really tugged at my heart because I am a survivor. And I know how when you experience childhood abuse, mine was sexual. When you experience childhood abuse, it affects you for the rest of your life. It affects the lens that you wear. And for me, it got me into domestically violent situations. I ended up marrying abusers because of my sense of unworthiness. And so I'm like, I have a message. I have message of hope, because at that point, 7 years ago, I had gotten away from my ex-husband and I had begun to really move into claiming my whole self, which I'd been on a spiritual growth journey for 20 years. And so strengthening that part of me and really, I often will talk about how I lived in my head all those years and really started to truly embody my whole self. And so I'm like, I'm a spiritual director at that point. And I'm like, I can use all of me to serve others, particularly in this space. So that's what led me to move into creating the organization going forward, Survivors to Thrivers.
Wow. Wow. So it sounds as though, kind of your first, incarnation as a freelancer was, a job, right? I mean, it was kind of like a job like you had before, but on your own. Whereas
Yes.
I get a sense that, going forward, Survivors to Thrivers is more of a calling. Do you see it that way? Or
I do. Absolutely. And one thing I will say, Brian, is, when we're moving into what we feel like is a calling for me, I mean, there was a huge discernment piece. I heard God calling me to do something in this space. And then I was reading an article about a women's march, and it talked about we need more than a march. We need a movement. And when I went into my prayer and meditation time that morning, that's when it was like,
Wow.
that's what I want. I want you to begin to create a movement in this space. And so you do. I mean, and so I think a lot of it's about openness. A
Mhm.
lot of it's, and I've been praying for 2 months on this. So this wasn't something that just,
Mm,
happened
mm,
quickly. I really
mhm,
wanted to know, what is it that I'm supposed to do in this space? So
mm.
yes, it's a passion, it's a calling. And I think because of that, when people engage with me on this topic, they feel that. They feel my heart
Yeah,
around
yeah.
around the work.
Wow. So I just finished reading a book called Discernment by Henry Nouwen. And
Yes, love it.
it's a fantastic book. And it
Yes.
dives into, some of the specific aspects of
Yes.
discernment. And he talks about how, he has been, he has experienced reading the signs, as he says,
Mhm.
through either books or people or prayer or nature or events.
Mhm.
And it
Yes.
sounded like what you just described was an example of an event, that
Yeah.
kind of help you turn the corner or make a decision that you've been leading up to in some
Mhm.
sense, as you said, for a couple of months. Is that
Yes.
the way you think of it or no?
It's so true. And it's really, I mean, truly listening. So an example of that would be that I was at a retreat. And at this retreat, I meet someone, a wonderful person who tells me, wants to get to know a little bit more about my work. We end up connecting. I tell him I'm going to the Wild Goose, and he says, "Oh, well, if you're going to the Wild Goose, you need to try and meet Brian Elaine." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll work on that." And so, what did I do? So there's also boldness. There's also a willingness to step out perhaps from
Yeah.
your comfort zone. And but at the same time, to me, that was such a sign, for Andy to say that to me was such a sign of, all right, God, I'm listening. You are putting someone in my path, somewhere I'm going to be, and I'm just going to be open to. And then when I'm sitting listening, because I did attend your talk, the panel presentation, and as I'm listening to what you were trying to do, I'm like, oh, wow, this is pretty amazing how much there is an intersection between the work I'm doing and the how to heal our divides. And so that's just one example of really listening. And I think the other piece is, also listening internally. So yesterday I was in a planning meeting with someone and they started having a vision for me that is not the vision I see for myself. And I immediately felt a little bit of a churn inside of me. And I think it's important to use your own knowing, your own internal knowing. I mean, at times we'll talk about, God's spirit within you. And I think that was, my spirit was saying, that's a beautiful vision, but I don't see myself being an executive director of that kind of a center.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a lot of that. And I am a big nature person, so I do love to, take hints around that from nature when it
Mm-hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
it comes up.
So the new book that I just started, I've only a few chapters into it, but it's called Embrace Your Second Calling by Dale Hansen Burke, and I can actually pick it up if you want. It's
Okay.
more, as I found out, it's more written for women.
Hmm.
Jennifer Grant actually introduced me to Dale, and so I had a conversation with her, and just started reading this book. And Dale is a person who, kind of much like you, had a successful corporate career, and then basically said enough of that, and figured out what her real calling was.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so again, I'm kind of just at the beginning stages of it, but as you were saying, I mean, and I think part of this, my sense is too that it comes with age and maturity, and having gone through a lot of different things and said yes to plenty of things you kind of regretted later on. At least in my own case, I can attest to that. But I think this back to discernment.
Yes.
It's just as important to, if not more important, to be able to figure out what you want to say no to, as opposed to just, what you want to go after.
Well, and it's interesting, Brian, there's also a book, it's been out for a long time, called Halftime. And the
Yes.
concept is that we get to a place in our lives where we've been focusing on success for all these years, and all of a sudden we're ready to move toward significance. And so I think that, and your halftime can be whenever.
Yeah.
But when is it that you're wanting to shift your focus to something that really does, feed your heart, feed your spirit, and give you a sense of significance and contribution?
Well, I didn't realize this until I talked to Dale, but she told me that writing this book was a result of Halftime.
Oh, okay.
And
There you
her
go.
interactions with Bob Buford, who, wrote
Yes.
Halftime. And
Yes.
she said, that was kind of a male-oriented, book. And she said, I
Wow.
wanted to create, a female-oriented book.
Okay. Oh, that's great. I
But
love
the
knowing
Halftime,
that.
is turned into a whole business now, too. It's a
Yes.
Halftime Institute. I'm discovering all these things now.
Yes. Yes.
But in any event, what would you say are some of the most important things that you've learned, after having been on your own now for a while?
Hmm. There's a resilience piece, because there are things that I invest myself in that don't come to fruition, and I need to not get disheartened by that, and trust that, there's still been good foundation laid. I also am very aware of my bandwidth, and really kind of staying conscious of that. I also personally, I just really try to be open to opportunities. I mean, again, the How to Heal Our Divides opportunity, and kind of leaning into things that may, and even, speaking, that was something that was not, although I was used to facilitating large groups, being the one, speaking wasn't necessarily right. And so I think being open to being stretched and learning and growing, and especially in my space, but probably a lot of different spaces. And I'd be interested in knowing your thoughts on this one, but just the willingness to be vulnerable. I think people can read your heart and your intention as you are vulnerable in, sharing what it is you're seeking to accomplish, seeking to partner with them, whatever it is. That vulnerability, especially because of my backstory, which I've alluded to, I mean, that's been a growth piece for me as well, because being vulnerable early on wasn't safe. And so, but at the same time, oh my goodness, the number of just wonderful relationships like, the one you and I have created. I mean, it leads to abundance. It really does.
Well, yeah, let me touch on a couple of different things that you mentioned there. The whole vulnerability thing, that, talk about a big change for me, right? I mean, I grew up in corporate America as a guy, and in those days, in that world, you never dealt with any personal things, in business. Those were like completely separate worlds. And now that, I've been dealing for, the last several years with authors, where those worlds are so dramatically overlapped, it's, obviously forced me to change, I think. But the other thing I would say that's going on in the midst of all this is just the quest for authenticity.
Yes,
that's out there. And, sharing vulnerability, I think, is a big component of authenticity, and kind of making people feel comfortable that, whoever it is that they're dealing with or talking with is actually real and not a facade, or trying to BS them. So, that doesn't make it easy necessarily, right? But I think it just kind of shows the value of it.
Yes, exactly. No, I love that word.
The other thing I want to touch on is what you talked about before, about being able to come to grips with things that don't work. And I'm a big believer in that too. As an entrepreneur, you've got to treat, I think, everything as an experiment, right? And some experiments work and some experiments don't. And if you don't have some that fail, you're probably not experimenting enough.
There you go.
I think,
Yes.
So,
yes.
I totally, I want to say back up all those things that you just said that, learnings of yours after kind of making the leap.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the value of community comes up for me as well, because as you are, having to maybe bounce back from something that was disappointing or thinking about something that you might want to do, but you're not sure how that, would work, a sense of having a community around you can also be very valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. So what advice do you have for people who, are kind of like considering their
Mm.
first leap of faith to start a business on their own?
Yeah, I think that really recognizing what is a part of you, what is your skill set, what is your gifting, really kind of leaning into that, because that's what you're meant to bring forth, I believe. And so getting clear about what is that. And like I said, for me, it was, okay, I don't want to do the, 9 months to a year kind of large scale projects. I want to do more. So kind of getting clear about what is it you want to bring of yourself forward. And then thinking about, what does the world need? What gaps are out there? What can I fill with what I have to bring? Because I think that will help you when you start, really beginning to promote yourself. It's your niche. It's your, what you're bringing to the space, what differentiates you from whoever else is out there doing the work you want to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if we could, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about, your organization,
Okay.
Survivors to Thrivers organization. So in what areas is it active?
hmm I mentioned the importance of community a minute ago as people are branching out. Part of my reason for creating it is that survivors of abuse and trauma can feel very alone. We often feel, one of my kind of sound bites is, let's stop the silencing, the shame, and the secrecy. And so we can often sit in our bubbles of shame, feeling somewhat maybe responsible, or at least, and again, we have all these unhealthy thoughts that were created either by ourselves trying to figure it out, what was happening, or the other person may have put those thoughts into our brains. And so beginning to create a community of support and encouragement, and as well as providing healing practices so that people can, because sometimes you can sit there and think, okay, I don't even know what the first step looks like. And so, really trying to create that sense of community. So when we talk about, okay, so then what do we do to do that? And so one of the things I did was I created the website where people can go and again begin to get a sense of, okay, this is a community I can plug into. We provide blogs twice a month. Often I'm writing the blog, but once a quarter, I actually have a fellow survivor write the blog. So it's not just Tambry putting things out there. It's hearing other voices around this topic and also sharing. So the first of the month is sharing their story, and it's their survivor to thriver story back to bringing that hope and encouragement and helping people feel like, oh, wow, I can relate to that. And you might relate to my story a little bit more. You might relate to someone else's story. We had our first male blogger in December. And so, I want it to be not just a women's thing. I mean, it happens sadly, across the board. And so, so the blogs are a big piece of what we try and do to put, again, encouragement. And the second, I forgot to mention, on the 15th of the month, we have, there are more practices. And so, we were talking about discernment. That might be a topic. I might talk about how to discern and actually take you through a discernment practice. I've definitely taken people through, how do you get grounded? How do you get in your body, and some techniques to do that. Sometimes it might be a reflection activity. So we try and mix it up and use different modalities. Sometimes it might be a mindful nature walk and things to think about. So, again, expanding survivors to think about what they can do for themselves and what might fit their personality. We also provide daily Instagram and Facebook posts because, again, some days we can feel really strong and other days we question everything. And so really trying to have consistent messaging and encouraging and, again, providing. And a lot of times I build them off of the blog so that I have consistent messaging around that. So those are some of the system level things that I offer. I also do one-on-one coaching.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, so I do one-on-one coaching. So really with the first part, and this might be helpful for the people that they're thinking about doing, something on their own, the first part is getting you to know me, back to that authenticity. You feel my heart, you see what I bring to the table, you get a sense of the kinds of resources I provide. And so, I do that on the front end. And then, yes, I would love, and I actually even give, do a 30-minute kind of connect. Let's just talk about what's possible so that people can get to know me. I do that for free. And then we can move into the actual kind of what I call transformational coaching, which, you can look back and do the therapy work with a therapist, that healing work from victim to survivor. But what I do is I meet you in the survivor place, and I help you move from just surviving day to day, being stuck with these unhealthy beliefs that are limiting you, to move toward thriving. And there's a process I take you through to do that. I mentioned, earlier about marrying abusers. I didn't believe I was worthy of being treated well. And so that's a big one to to unpack and uncover and begin to flip. And I don't know, how many people know about like, now I'm blanking out, the pathways in your brain. I can't think of the word right now, but you can rework those and you can really begin to get the affirmation part of your brain working and the belief part of your brain working versus the part of your brain that shuts you down and makes you believe I'm not capable of these things. And so those are the kind of things that I will work with people to really begin to do that shift. And my change management background comes in where we really look at, okay, so and what kind of things are we going to put in place to help this stick? We've made the process of movement. What kind of things can we put in place to really help you be successful and continue this thriving path that you're on?
Very cool. Well, I'm really glad that, your business has all those different facets to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it brings my heart anytime I connect with a survivor. It brings my heart joy to be able to do any kind of work with them to help them begin seeing that light. The name of my book is Awakening the Light, and that's what I want to do. I believe we all have this light within us, and some of them might be dimmed from the things that have happened. And let's awaken that. Let's grow that light within.
So let's talk about books now, since you mentioned that.
Okay.
Awakening the Light, a Survivors to Thrivers Going Forward story. How did the book come about?
That was so interesting. And again, that was one of those being open and being resilient. So I had someone who I had worked with on some things with him, and he had already written another book. And he said, Tambry, I would really like to co-author a book with you. And I'm like, okay. And never really thought about being an author. And he's like, but he also knew my story and he had his own wounding. And so I was like, okay, I can see where having a male voice and a female voice around the journey could be really powerful. And I like him because he is a very vulnerable, authentic person. And so I thought this could be really cool. And this will be a way for me to begin to move into what I feel like God's calling me. And so I did my work. I created my portion of the chapter. I even, the book has portions of the story, and then it has portions of practice. And so I had done both my story and some of the practice. And he is a big time entrepreneur. And so sometimes what comes with that is there's a whole lot of things that get their attention. And so he saw something else that he decided that he needed to do now, and he wasn't ready to go forward with this. And it's like, okay, so what do I do? And I prayed about it. But I thought, I'm almost to the finish line here, and so maybe I really, in my heart, believe that he was put in my life to give me the courage
Isn't
to
it crazy
write
how things work
this
out? I
book.
mean, you never would have
Yes.
gone into something suspecting that route, right?
No, not at all.
How many things in life, I don't know about you, but I've certainly experienced a lot of things like that.
Yes. And it's like, okay, and the beautiful thing is because it was my singular voice, I was able to tie it even more tightly
Mm,
to my organization and
mm,
my personal mission.
sure,
So
sure.
it actually ended up probably being for the best, but I did not see that coming. So it was a little bit of a back end, Brian, is how I got into it.
God works in incredible ways. That's all you can say.
Yes.
So that was a workbook. What made you decide on that format?
Yes. Um, I think in part, I really did want to share my story of woundedness and healing to be encouraging, but the big piece, and this is back to using who you are. I'm a healer. I want to help people heal, and so really being able to share um, prompts, the growth
Mm,
prompts
mm,
with people really is where my heart was. And so I share my story to help people connect to their own story. And then I help take them to that next deeper level by asking some of the prompts. I also in the book, I have like breathing sections, just to kind of, okay, let's just take a breath here, trying to really help people understand because we start breathing shallowly and we don't even realize it. And yet, we're tensed up. And so how do we begin to be intentional around taking care of ourselves in the moment? And so being able to weave those parts of me as coach, as spiritual director into the book was important to me because I really wanted it to be something that was a true resource. And a lot of people times, like I said earlier, people don't know where to start. And so I've been told it's a beautiful way to, in the privacy of your own home, in your own time, if you want to just, slowly dip a toe in to answer some of these questions, or if you want to skip some questions and move to some other ones, that's just fine. And I have therapists tell me that it's a beautiful tool to work in conjunction with the work they're doing. And so I feel like it's just a really good resource. And what happened was I had someone say, they're with an AA group. And they said, Tambry, we want to use this book in a small group because, I mean, realistically, a lot of people who are in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, have been wounded in some way. And so considering it, because the book is not just about sexual abuse and domestic violence, it's about woundedness. It's about abuse and trauma. And so it really applies to most everyone, to be honest. And so this group wanted to use the book, like read the book, do the workbook themselves, and then meet about it. And I loved that idea. And I know what a tender topic this is. And I wanted to make sure that when people meet, I wanted them to have sacred space and I wanted there to be a tool to help them. And so this is a facilitator's guide. The group growth guide is a facilitator's guide to really companion the book so that if there's one person or if they're sharing facilitation, they can really create a safe space, create the needed boundaries, the confidentiality boundaries, those kind of things, as well as some icebreaker type things as people are beginning to, start to expand their understanding. And so that's kind of how the group guide came to be, because I loved the idea of people, coming together to support one another on this healing journey using the workbook, but then also having something to kind of create that, again, that's that safe, sacred space for when people came together.
Hmm, hmm. Well, I've said this several times, but Frederick Buechner wrote this thing about AA. And one of the things he said was he feels like that's kind of closer to what the original church probably was and what today's church probably ought to be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, when you talk about
Yeah.
sacred, places, it sounds like
Yes.
you're in the same direction.
Yes, absolutely. Because back to being vulnerable, they're being vulnerable, and they've really, anyone that enters those doors wants to be on a healing journey. And so, working that aspect of their lives, but also being open to working that what happened underneath that led perhaps to some of the unhealthy pieces in their
Mhm,
life.
mhm. So, as I mentioned before, the book was a finalist for the 2020 American Book Fest Best Book Award,
Yes.
which was really wonderful.
Yes.
What do you think was so compelling about the book that it got such a
You,
recognition?
oh, I think people tell me, so it was really interesting when I was going through, I actually had a kind of an editor for what was it? A publisher who then put me in with someone to kind of do the final editing and that type of thing. And he he didn't reach out to me. He reached out to the publisher. So he and I were not in direct communication, but he reached out to the publisher and asked if he could contact me. So anyway, we end up together, and he said, "Tambry, I read a lot of books. I edit a lot of books." He said, "I felt like you were my best friend by the end of this book."
Wow.
He said, "Your heart." And he
Mm,
said, "And you
mm,
really helped me." And the interesting thing with him is that he's not a survivor, but he has survivors in his life. And he said, "It
mm,
really helped me understand
mm,
what's going on and how I can be supportive to them." And so I think in part it's the tonality,
mm.
it's the heart, it's the vulnerability. I really do just try and share my story and what's going on within me. And I do also think it's because it truly is. It doesn't. Another one of my reviewers said, "Tambry's book doesn't leave you where you started." So,
Mm.
it meets you where you are, and it helps to guide you. And so I think that it back to really helping people begin their healing journey. And so it's I think because it bridges both pieces.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I mean, congratulations, on being able to achieve that in a book, right? I mean, that degree of becoming a friend, so to speak, as you mentioned. It's like that's
Yeah.
a, that's
I
a real
mean, that was
skill.
such a gift for him to tell me. And that's the
Yeah.
thing, the gifts that come with this. I mean, him sharing that with me and receiving that recognition from the book. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, so I have some cred. I just was so grateful for them to recognize it, so that it would encourage people to say, this is of value to me. And I want to tap into this.
Well, I mean, it's a confidence builder too, right? When do
Yes.
get those kinds of
Yes.
recognition, and you mentioned something, one of the little things I read about finding your voice, right? And I think,
Oh,
a
yes.
lot of that has to do with confidence.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes.
in any event, so I mentioned that there's a new book coming out, Stop the
Yes.
Silence, Thriving After Childhood Sexual Abuse. So what's the story behind that book?
Yep. I'm gonna show you a picture of it, Brian. There it is. So that was really fun. So I've been doing a lot of different podcasts trying to, again, promote the organization and the work we do. And so I've been on someone's podcast, and then she actually recommended me to Pamela Pine, who is the founder of the organization, Stop the Silence, and it's around childhood sexual abuse.
Hmm.
And so they were looking to do a collaborative book, finding again, and it just was like so aligned with my heart, finding survivors who are willing to put their voice out around their story and then share their practice. I'm like,
Oh, wow.
well, there
There you
we are.
go.
Um,
It's just what you've done.
I mean, it's like, okay, how do I only have a chapter for this? But it's okay. Um, But what was beautiful was there are 24 authors, and it is international.
Hmm.
So we have New Zealand, we have Zambia, we have Egypt, I mean, all over the world, you have these authors, these voices coming forward. And even in the US, an indigenous person came up, has a story in there. And so experiencing it. And the thing that I think is, if it's not, it may be subtle, but to me, it shares the fact that this is not a U.S. thing.
Hmm.
this is an international issue. And in some countries, it may be worse than others, but it is an international issue. And so we can come together to make a difference, to raise awareness, to stop the, again, her title was Stop the Silence, but also Stop the Shame, because when we don't talk about it, that's what makes it shameful. Let's shine some light on this so there isn't the shame that surrounds the victims and the family. I mean, the family members, the friends are open to being able to support and encourage. So many of us are just silenced by people that should be advocates for us. And so it's such an important thing. And so back to affirmation, the book itself has been hit 6 different categories, #1 bestseller on Amazon. Wow. So super excited about that. Paperback, childhood sexual abuse, social justice, teen health, I mean, all these categories. And so to me, what that says is that we're already beginning to live into our intention of stopping the silence, because people are getting this book. People are reading our stories. People will be emboldened to talk about it and make a difference in this space.
Interesting. Very cool. Very cool too.
Yeah.
So I noticed that the book is published by Brave Healer Productions, which I'd never heard of before. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
They have a heart for social justice type books. And so, as I mentioned, Pamela Pine was the founder of the organization, and she chose them to be the ones to collaborate with, I think, because of their heart for, again, these kinds of topics. Interestingly, the owner of Brave Healer Productions, as we're writing this book, she and her daughter are fighting a court battle against her sexual abuser.
Oh my God. Wow.
And so her daughter's a teen. And all that she had to go through and all the attempts at silencing and squelching. And so it was actually interesting, back to God working in amazing ways, so here she is fighting her own battle real time. And then she's having these stories come in of people who have, and some of the stories are mothers who have had to stand up for their children. And so yeah, I think the fact that Pamela chose Laura and her organization to help produce it, there's just so many layers of goodness to it. And then Laura was the one who kind of guided us in how we wrote our chapter, in kind of the format of the chapter and the titling of the chapter. So she really had a lot of passion around the crafting of the book, to make it of the, quality and impact that she was hoping for. And it did give me an opportunity to, my chapter, I mentioned the fact that I did do this in my other book, but I talk about, embodying your truth. And so allowing your body to come forth with its truth. And how do you ask these healing, life-giving questions? And so it really gave me an opportunity to kind of hone in on a specific piece that I don't know that as many people are talking about. So, so that's a little bit about the book and Laura DeFranco, who was the publisher.
Excellent. That's all good to hear.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, are there any future books or projects that you can talk about at this point?
So the other book, and back to, sometimes this gets back to boundaries, although I'm glad I didn't create boundaries on this. Excuse me. But I was asked during the last summer, to be a collaborative author in 2 books. And the timing of the writing of the chapters was a little bit different. And I thought, okay, I can make this work. They both came out within a week of each other.
Of course. Murphy's Law.
So it's like, wow, okay, breathe. And so I really, I leaned into the Stop the Silence book first, because April is Sexual Abuse Awareness Month. And And so really being able to promote the book, promote the message through the course of April was really important. And so that was really important for me to do. The other book is called Love Does Not Control.
Hmm.
And Thomas Ord, I don't know if you know him
Yeah,
or
no, I
not.
sure do.
Okay, so he wrote a book called God Can't.
Mm-hmm.
And in that book, it addresses the fact that, when something really awful happens, it's like, where was God? Why didn't God intervene? Why didn't God intervene in the school shooting in Nashville? Why didn't God intervene in, my life when this awful stuff was happening to me? And the premise is there are some things that God can't, and a lot of times we have to, you know, so how do I partner with God to bring goodness into this world, to make a difference in this world? And so the second book, not second book, but this book that I was a part of, he asked therapists, counselors, spiritual directors to kind of talk about how they see that collaboration working. And so I'm able to talk about, how I do see, and I bring in Henry Nouwen into it, the wounded healer. I bring in some of that thinking and really, talk about how we can, how we can partner with God in our own lives for healing and in others' lives for healing. So that book has come out, and I'm going to begin to start promoting it in May.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. That's all good to know.
Yes.
Well, Tambry, it's so good to catch up with you. Thanks for joining us today. And I really am so glad to see how things have thrived, grown, evolved since, we first met. And congratulations on all of your work and, the clear passion that you have behind it. And, I think it's just such a great example of, finding your calling. So
thank you.
Congratulations on arriving there, so to speak. Not that any of us have ever arrived, but
Well, it's a journey. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and Brian, one thing I'd like to mention, and I almost mentioned it a minute ago, and I thought, no, I'm going to wait till the very end. As I mentioned that this is Sexual Abuse Awareness Month. Mm-hmm. And I have a co-author who lives in a town near me, and we're hosting a book launch event on April 30th. It's a Sunday, and it's in person, but it's also virtual.
Okay,
and
good.
So I would love to invite your audience if they're interested in joining us. And so what I'm going to do is just go to my website, survivors2thrivers.com, and we'll get you connected if you're interested. It's from 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern time. And it's both a celebration of the book and the difference we're making, but it's also Leanne will speak, I will speak. The founder of the organization is creating a snippet to talk about the work they're doing. And it's really about building community, emboldening people to find their voice around this topic. And and again, I do want to celebrate, some of the movement that we are starting to see in the space.
And you said that's April 30th, right?
April 30th. Yes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Tambry, again, thanks so much. I look forward to, collaborating with you and catching up again. So take care for now.
Thank you so much, Brian. So good to see you.